All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are breaking down a really powerful AI training technique called RGPO. Now, this is all about making your model smarter, more nuanced, and we're going to walk through a quick practical guide on how you can actually get this up and running. So everything really starts with this one fundamental question. Standard AI training, it's pretty good at teaching a model what a correct answer looks like, but how do you push it further? How do you get it to go from just good to genuinely great? Well, that's the exact problem GRPO is built to solve. And here's the core difference in a nutshell. Most standard methods, they just compare two options. Is A better than B? But GRPO, it does something totally different. It shows the model a whole crowd of possible answers and helps it learn the subtle preferences across that entire group. It's basically about teaching the AI to learn from the wisdom of the crowd. So keeping that learning from the crowd idea in mind, let's go ahead and get a slightly more formal definition of what we're talking about here. The absolute key here is that the model learns from groups of responses, not just pairs. So for a single prompt, it'll generate several different potential answers. Then, using what's called a reward signal, it figures out the relative quality across that whole group. This is what leads to a much more refined understanding of what makes a response truly excellent. Okay, so that's the theory, but how do you actually put this thing into practice? Well, it breaks down into a really clear 4-step blueprint, especially if you happen to be using a popular library like TRL. The whole process really has 4 main stages. First, you've got to get your prompts ready. Second, and this one is absolutely crucial, you design a reward function that basically defines what a good response even is. Third, you configure the training parameters. And finally, you launch the trainer. For this guide, we're really going to zoom in on the most critical parts, steps 2 and 3. So let's zoom in on what is probably the single most important parameter, the one that puts the G for group in GRPO. Think of this as the main dial you'll be turning. Yep, it all comes down to one key parameter in your training configuration, num generation. This single number tells the model exactly how many different responses to generate for each and every prompt. It is, for all intents and purposes, the main control knob for the entire GRPO process. Which, of course, brings us to the next logical question. If this number is so important, what should you set it to? I mean, is bigger always better? Well, the recommended sweet spot, based on what we've seen in practice, is a group size somewhere between 4 and 16. This range gives you a fantastic balance. You get enough variety for the model to learn meaningful patterns without completely crushing your computational resources. And here's how you can think about that trade-off. A smaller group, say 4 to 8, is a great place to start. You get good diversity and the computational cost is lower. But if you really need the model to learn some complex nuances, pushing to a larger group, maybe 8 to 16, can give you excellent results. Just be ready because it's definitely going to require more compute power. Okay, we've got our groups. But now the model needs a way to actually judge the responses inside that group. This is where your reward function comes in. And you should really think of it as the brain of the whole operation. It's what defines what good actually means. Seriously, designing this function is absolutely critical to your success. So let's walk through 3 really practical, effective designs that you can adapt for your own projects, inspired by some successful implementations out there. First up, we've got the simplest approach, rewarding based on length. Let's say you want your model to generate answers that are around, 20 tokens long. This simple line of code gives a higher reward to responses that are closer to that ideal length, and it penalizes the ones that are too short or too long. It is surprisingly effective for just controlling output style. Now, for tasks like math or coding, you can be way more objective. Here, the reward can be based on a simple question: does it work? This function gives a perfect score of 1.0 if the generated code executes without any errors, and a big fat 0 if it doesn't. It's a crystal clear binary signal of success. And what if you need a structured output, like for an API? Well, you can reward the model for getting the format right. This example checks if the output is valid JSON. If it is, boom, full reward. If not, it gets nothing. This is perfect for teaching a model how to interact with APIs or databases correctly. All right, you've got your group size picked out, you've designed your reward function, you're almost ready to go. Let's just cover a few final tips to make sure your training run is a success from the get-go. So 3 quick tips for a smooth run. First, memory. If you run into any out-of-memory issues, the easiest fix is usually just to reduce your batch size. Second, speed. If your setup supports it, enabling VLLM can make generation way faster. And finally, don't just set it and forget it. You really need to monitor the training logs to see what's actually happening. And when you look at those logs, here are the 3 key metrics to watch. First, the reward itself. That's your main progress bar. You want to see that average score climbing up. The reward stead, or standard deviation, is also pretty interesting. It shows you if there's good diversity of scores in your groups. And finally, KL divergence tells you how much the model is changing from its original state. You don't want this to shoot up too high too fast. Watching these 3 really tells you the story of your training run. So if you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. The big idea of GRPO is to train on groups, not just pairs. It's all about learning from that rich, diverse information you can only find when you compare many responses all at once. And that brings us to our final thought. With the power to define good in any way you want, whether it's through length or rules or format, the possibilities are just vast. So the question I want to leave you with is this. What new, amazing ability could your AI learn if you just gave it the right reward?